Well, good afternoon and thank you. And let me start by saying I very much welcome the TUC's continued support for collective efforts to tackle climate change, and I'm very pleased to be here to talk to you about it. It's one of those issues that, if we're going to make any headway, it's got to cut across parties and governments, and it's got to cross the different sides of industry, and we've got to work together on it. Let me just say briefly, from a personal level, how I got involved in this, probably starting about 30 years ago. Something called the Brundtland Report, after the Prime Minister of Norway, done for the United Nations. It was the first report that really raised seriously the issue of climate change, the beginning of a scientific consensus. I sort of worked with her on it, and then went on from that to the first intergovernmental meeting, which raised the issue of climate change and action. And I go back that far because I think it is important to remind ourselves that the beginnings of a scientific understanding of this problem go back a long way. Consensus has built up over a very long period of time, because we periodically get people suddenly discovering that they've discovered some new piece of evidence that it doesn't, that the theory is all wrong. But let's not forget that over 3 decades, a whole generation of scientists have put together the evidence in order to establish that there is a problem, and a problem that we collectively have to deal with. And I think this is well understood, not just in academia and in government and in the NGO community. It's also understood by companies that have to plan in the long term. Before I became an MP, I used to work for Shell, oil and gas. We had a decades-long planning horizon, which involved shifting to gas in the short run because there was less carbon, and in the long term shifting to hydrogen as the fuel that will be the fuel in the middle of this century. So I think we've long accepted, I think people have to think long term, that climate change is an issue we have to deal with. And as far as I'm concerned, I believe that being green isn't something that's just a nice thing to do. It's absolutely fundamental to how we run the economy and how we have growth and employment. I think the main text that I start with on the link between climate change and the economy is the outstanding work that was done under the last government by Nick Stern. You may remember the Stern Review. It really looked comprehensively at all the economic analysis, established that the global costs of climate change could be anywhere between 5 and 20% of global economy if no action was taken to abate it, and the costs of effective action by comparison are about 1% of GDP. It's actually a no-brainer if you look at the underlying economics. In terms of our economy, I think we perhaps tend to underestimate how far green industries and services in the widest sense now account for something approaching 10% of the economy. It's about 125 billion, probably about 8% of the economy, but it's growing faster than the rest of the country. About 1 million people are employed in activities that one could describe as green economy, environmentally based. And this isn't at the expense of the rest of the economy. On the contrary, having a strong set of environmental policies helps economic growth, and it helps jobs in several respects. First of all, it helps by using resources more efficiently. Specifically, it helps by reducing energy costs. Increasing energy efficiency all reduces the costs of production, and it creates new market opportunities. If Britain can be at the head of some of these new technologies, it's something we can sell to the rest of the world with all the jobs that come from that. Now, what I have tried to do with my colleagues is embed some of this thinking in what we've called an industrial strategy. Basically, the starting point of the industrial strategy, 2 points, basically. First of all, there are large chunks of the British economy where we need to think long term. We need to think past any individual government. We need to plan ahead. And there are important sectors of the economy where a pure laissez-faire market approach doesn't work, where governments have to work with business in a collaborative way. things that the market doesn't pick up, major market failures that we have to try to address. And that's essentially what an industrial strategy is all about. And it kicks in several very specific ways. I mean, obviously there are important parts of the economy that we would expect to grow in response to concerns about climate change, renewables, both new renewables and nuclear, and each of those in turn could draw behind them very substantial supply chains. Just to give some orders of magnitude here, if we're talking about offshore wind alone, we think there is the potential to deliver about 18 gigawatts by 2020, potentially 40 gigawatts by 2030, if costs can be brought down, and we already are in quite a rapidly falling cost curve in that area. Nuclear could deliver about 16 gigawatts by 2025, replacing the existing fleet. And each of those two sectors in turn would involve investment of something of the order of 15 billion for offshore wind, or particularly offshore, but the wind sector generally, and 60 billion for nuclear. So potentially enormous investment decisions that have to be made and have got major industrial implications. The industrial strategy isn't simply concerned with those industries which have a long-term lead time but are directly concerned with carbon abatement, but other industries indirectly. I mean, one of the areas of the British economy, manufacturing, that's relatively successful is the automotive industry. I think some of those of you may remember that 30 years ago it was, I wouldn't say it was written off, but it wasn't. It was an area with a lot of problems, which had a major revival in recent years. And its long-term future in part depends on the industry adapting to a low-carbon environment. A lot of investment is now going in areas like, based on the subsidies we're giving to charging points for electric vehicles, the support for the Leaf, which is the next generation of cars that will emerge from Nissan in Sunderland. And the industry fully understands that they have to adapt in this way, and it's something that they will only do on a collaborative basis with government, that they've got to know that the supportive policies will be in place. And even a sector like aerospace has to understand that we're moving to an era where fuel economy will become increasingly important, where lighter materials are important in terms of fuel use. So the idea of climate change interacting with industry policy cuts across the board. We also recognise that in the policies we do, we mustn't undermine UK industrial competitiveness in other sectors. And there is a particular problem in iron and steel, and to some extent chemicals, and some other areas where policies designed to counter change could, through electricity costs, impinge on their competitiveness, and this is already an issue. The TUC has been quite heavily involved with the Energy Intensive Users Group on a cross-industry basis, produced an excellent report which I think you're discussing here. I'm very conscious of the problems in these areas. I'm going down to Wales after leaving you to the steel complex near Swansea, so I'll be discussing it with the management there. And the starting point we have is that these are critically important industries. We don't want to lose them or have them very substantially reduced in scale because of the indirect unintended consequences of strong carbon abatement policies. Quite apart from anything else, if they're driven offshore, they still produce pollution. It doesn't help solve the global problem, it just puts the UK at a disadvantage. So what we have to do is to try and find some way of helping these industries. Other countries already do that. Germany has a very sophisticated and very generous system of helping their energy-intensive industries, and we've made a commitment in government to provide some compensation, particularly for the carbon price floor and the TUC scheme. And there is a consultation out at the moment, which we're inviting you, amongst others, to contribute to. So I think that's the context in which we're trying to integrate thinking about climate change with our broad approach to industrial policy. And there are several other initiatives we're taking which bear upon these issues. One of them is the launch of the Green Investment Bank. This has been in gestation for some time, but we got state aid approval last week. What this means that the bank can now fully operate. It has 3 billion of funding from the Treasury. We're hoping that through gearing we'll get something of the order of 15 billion additional funding from the private sector. That's yet to be shown, but that's the objective. And it's to tackle some of the high-risk projects with an environmental edge to them that wouldn't occur simply through the market. We've already, in its preparatory stage, done a series of projects, some to do with waste, others to do with industrial energy efficiency. We will hope that it will, over the next few years, get into new renewables like wind. The intention is that this Green Investment Bank will develop further. It will, in due course, acquire borrowing powers, though that's dependent at the moment on the state of the national economy. And it will be, we hope, a really major and pioneering institution. As far as I'm aware, there's nothing quite like this in any other part of the world. The other key area of policy which is developing at the moment is an attempt to put in place a system of electricity pricing and charging which will sustain long-term investment in energy generally and renewables in particular. Legislation is coming forward very quickly. The electricity market review is a key policy, all of that, and it will embed targets for decarbonisation as well as objectives for security of supply and affordability of energy bills. Another initiative forms part of our what we call the Catapult programme. This is sort of building on an idea that I'm taking forward from the end of the last government. Peter Mandelson, I think it was, commissioned Herman Hauser to do some work on what's the most effective way of promoting innovation. And the conclusion they came to, and which I've taken on, is that you need concentrated centres of excellence for research which are directly linked to industrial applications. The first one, which we launched just over a year ago, relates to advanced manufacturing. The centre is in Sheffield, but it has a hub and spoke arrangement with a variety of other institutions in Scotland, the North East, the West Midlands and Bristol. The next was specifically related to new renewable technology, and I opened this a few months ago. Its headquarters is in Glasgow at Strathclyde University, and it's got links to the testing centre in Narek in Northumberland, and also to some of the more pioneering work that's been done, for example, in Orkney on marine and tidal power. And I was actually there this weekend, and there is a staggering amount of progress being made in what were, until quite recently, regarded as really quite way out areas of research. On the quayside in Kirkwall, for example, you can see the massive turbines which have been made by Rolls-Royce and which will drive some of this technology. The key is cost. There's very small scale at the moment, but there is now the technology available to create very substantial long-term electricity supplies through this medium. In addition to those specific initiatives, we have a more general objective, which is to try to encourage industry to look at all different ways of becoming more efficient in resource use, not just energy, but water, natural resources in general. And there is something called a Resource Security Action Plan, working with business, hopefully saving something of the order of 20 to 25 billion if this is fully put into effect. And the last group of initiatives we're taking is around skills. Most of these green industries are going to require a new set of skills currently not available, and this is not going to emerge spontaneously from industry. Some of it will, some of it's got to be supported by government. And last week I opened in Southport a new renewable energy training centre, which is part of a network of what we call the National Skills Academy for Environmental Technologies. And this is something that the TUC has a significant role to play in. I think your Uni and Learn initiative has quite an important component in the sort of green economy area, and we very much welcome the role you're playing in all of that. So perhaps I could just, on that note, bring things to a head. One of the ways we engage directly with you in government is through the Green Economy Council. Francis has been a very valued member of that group, and through its subcommittees and so on, we look at very specific aspects of how environmental policy relates to our wider economic agenda, and it's crucial. Because of all this is fundamentally very long term, it's important that we have policies in place that cover both sides of industry and across the political spectrum, that we have a long-term intergenerational commitment. And you're an important part of that process, and we very much welcome the role that you play. Thank you.